HeadPod Touch, also gone. Gone with the creepy recorder thing.
It was cool. Listen to.
All right. Where did I just set all my stuff?
Mexico.
Oh. Losing my mind. All right. There's a piece of paper. Oh, right here. All right. I'm going to ask you to write 3 sentences. 1 sentence per each paragraph. These sentences are going to, the most important thing is that you are punctuating these sentences properly, and you are identifying the sentence type or the relationship type that I state clearly. And then in about 2 minutes time, you'll see how all of this stuff should enable you to get like 40 questions right on the ACT. So, heck yeah. All right, so with that in mind,
I do.
question number 1 deals with paragraph number 1, and you're welcome to have your book open. Use an intro phrase or a coordinating conjunction to illustrate a contrast relationship. Question number 2 deals with paragraph number 2. Use an intro phrase or a coordinating conjunction to identify a cause-effect relationship. And question number 3 deals with paragraph number 3. Use a intro phrase or coordinating conjunction to do a comparison or a contrast. You need to make sure that you have at least 1 intro phrase used and at least 1 coordinating conjunction used. Does that make sense? Okay, so paragraph 1, use an intro phrase sentence or a coordinating conjunction sentence to write your own identification of a contrast. Question 2 deals with paragraph 2. Use an intro phrase or coordinating conjunction to illustrate a cause-effect relationship. And paragraph 3, find a comparison or a contrast. Confused by the essay that you read for today? So you go to page 100 or 176. You look at paragraph 1, and then inside paragraph 1, you find a contrast. You write a sentence that identifies that contrast. Does that make sense? Yeah. Here, but I'm sensing some confusion. Sit down before we begin. Just sit next to somebody who has a book in the meantime. Let's do number 1 together. Okay. I'm going to read paragraph 1 out loud. While I'm reading it, I want you to look for something that contrasts. So identifying where the writer is illustrating a contrast type relationship. For example, let's say I was reading something out loud and I said, the Dolphins are good, the Vikings are better, the Packers are the best. And I said, Logan, tell me a sentence that illustrates a contrast that was just made.
Well, between the 2.
Yeah. So you read a paragraph.
Yeah.
The paragraph said the Dolphins are good, the Vikings are better, the Packers are the best. Logan, I want you to give me a sentence in an intro phrase that illustrates a contrast that I just said.
Like now?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I just got to review intro phase quick. 1 second.
Jet.
Go ahead.
While Lindenberg believes that the Vikings are good, he thinks the
Packers
are better.
Very good. So I read the paragraph said the Dolphins are good, the Vikings are better, the Packers are the best. Jet, in his own words, came up with a sentence that used an intro phrase to illustrate a contrast in my paragraph.
I get a video of you saying that the Dolphins are worse than the Packers.
Well, I mean, it's not a revolutionary statement right now. The Dolphins are in shambles. Okay, does that just make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so now we're going to try to apply that same principle here. We're going to read this paragraph out loud. You are going to need to create your own sentence that uses an intro phrase or a coordinating conjunction to identify a contrast that this author makes in the first paragraph. Okay, here we go. Lily, nope, definitely have an AP Lit book. We're just about to reach the James Joyce. Would have been very confusing. All right, here we go. Like most parents who have, against all odds, preserved a lively and still evolving passion for good books, I find myself each September increasingly appalled by the dismal list of texts my sons are doomed to waste a school year reading. What I get is a compensation is a measure of insight into why our society has come to admire Montel Williams and Ricky Lake so much more than Dante and Homer. Montel Williams and Ricky Lake are like the Jerry Springfield, I don't know what's the guy's name. You know, who has that talk like Maury Povich?
Oh.
Do you know what I'm talking? Who's the Jerry Springer? Jerry Springer. Anybody sit at home in daytime and watch TV?
I don't know Mary.
Maury Povich. Yeah, paternity test. Oh, like that would be like Montel and Ricky. All right. Given the dreariness with which literature is taught in many American classrooms, it seems miraculous that any sentient teenager would view reading as a source of pleasure. Traditionally, the love of reading has been born and nurtured in high school English class, the last time many students will find themselves in a room full of people who have all read the same text and are, in theory, prepared to discuss it. High school, even more than college, is where literary tastes and allegiances are formed. What we read in adolescence is imprinted in our brains, and the dreary notions of childhood crystallized into hard data. So, where is there a contrast in this paragraph? What do you have, Jed?
Although many parents support the passion of reading, they're still being appalled by the books they're reading in school.
So the contrast is, even though parents love reading, they don't love the reading that kids are doing in school.
Yeah.
Right? So there is a contrast that is illustrated in the first paragraph. There's another one as well. It happens, or there's at least another one. It happens near the very end. Somebody tell me what's being contrasted in the very last sentence.
High school, even that part.
Yep.
High school, even more than college, is where literary taste and allegiances are formed. So it's like in high school, you decide, or like your mind decides what kind of text they like to read, what kind of text they like are going to understand.
What is that being contrasted against? High school is being contrasted
When
to
you read in college,
college, right? So how is high school different than college? What is the contrast?
it's where literary taste forms.
Yeah, more so than college. Okay. Ba-dum-bum-bum. And I kind of also get a sense of there's an implied contrast here between the books that are read in high school and what this person would consider good books. Right? What's the difference between the books that are read in high school and what this person would consider good books to be? This one's a little trickier because it's not explicitly
They're
stated.
more like modern and not
The books that are read in high school are what?
more modern now compared to. Wait, no, that's not.
Nope, that's fair, but that's not. Yeah, driving home the point that they're trying to make.
She explains the books and being taught are dreary.
As opposed to
Content, which are insightful.
there you go. So the books that are being taught are dreary and leading students to like Jerry Springer and Maury Povich, as opposed to a Dante or a Homer that would be more insightful. So we identified 3 instances of a contrast in that first paragraph, right? Okay, and then we, as an individual, need to write our own sentence that uses an intro phrase or coordinating conjunction that makes that contrast clear in our own words. So that's the task that you have to accomplish for paragraph 2 and paragraph 3. In paragraph 2, you find a cause effect and write an intro phrase or coordinating conjunction. Look at paragraph 3, find another compare or contrast, and use an intro phrase or coordinating conjunction to identify that and make it clear. Does that make sense, class? In a better shape? Whatever you use here for your sentence, don't use down here. So if you use an intro phrase for paragraph 2, that means you have to use a coordinating conjunction for paragraph 3.
Are we not good?
And vice versa.
Right now, one.
We just did, man.
Okay.
Okay.
When you're done, raise your hand. I'll come by and check out your sentences. If you need to go get books now, because that's your jam, go do that too. You want? Oh yeah. Gotta make weight. Nice.
I mean, I had like 20, so.
When you come back in, double check.
Don't trust me right now.
We'll be interacting with this. Isn't that one of our vocab words?
Vestigial.
Yeah, that.
Yep.
We didn't have to look at those things.
What? Comma.
Brady describes Gone with the Wind as tacky.
She has some hot takes through.
Do you know what the synonym for lunch is?
During.
I'm sorry.
Good job here. I would prefer for the next one though, you want to say it in your own words instead of exclusively repeating. Okay, that makes sense? Yeah. Okay, perfect. You identify the cause-effect relationship. Nail on that. Only sentences, man, not words.
Morning.
Morning. Doing great. Writing some sentences that you use.
She snuck in when I was busy.
Yeah.
I just wanna make sure she was here. Okay. Oh, she had it. She had it. So you're
No, just. No.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, tell us that. I can get you guys that discount.
Yeah. Not mad discount, 30% discount. Well, we have classes, you know, so whatever. There's a resource time in there.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Does the word indelible mean like lasting? Because it says indelible impression. I might not be saying that right.
well-written sentences, well-punctuated, state a relationship. But there's like,
Oh,
there are a number of right answers. This is like a layer below the most right answer.
okay.
Does that make sense?
Kind of. It's like,
Well, so for example, number 2. The most apparent cause-effect relationship is that because adults have loyalty to books they recommend, kids, that allows bad books to continue to remain popular, which is just a little different in the way you phrased it there. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, the same thing down here. It's like the contrast could be like, reading is so important, but we're wasting our opportunity to have kids read things of consequence. So the way you wrote it, great. You did do those things, great. Yes, we're a little, you left out the best answer.
okay.
Do. Okay, cool. Thanks.
Asking me to suggest something. I wrote down like the first one that we did, and the second one stuff.
You did a good job with the punctuation in number 2. And you did a good job identifying the context relationship in number 3.
I missed something else.
If we got rid of these books, would you need a comment?
Please excuse the interruption. Laura McFay, please come to the office. Laura McFay, please come to the office.
Why not? Right. So if you have 2 complete sentences and what you did, complete sentence, incomplete sentence, and what you did. That makes sense? Okay. Up here, the more. Clear statement of the cause effect relationship you have. The author. So if the cause is we are loyal to the books we read as young children, what is the effect of that? Yeah, try to answer that question just verbally. Raise your hand when you have, if the cause is we remain fiercely loyal as adults to the book we read as children. According to this author, what is the effect of that?
First name basis.
Basis and ellipsis.
Good punctuation on both. The cause effect, you state here is present in that paragraph, but it's not the best. Okay, the best one is what, they lead off with. If the cause is, we remain fiercely loyal as adults to the books we read as children. What is the effect of that? Yeah, we'll continue to read those old textbooks. Okay. Great punctuation. Figure out Chris. Yes, yeah. Does that make sense? Yeah. Do you see how that one's more kind of like pressing than the one you have? Okay.
All right, so we went on a little bit of a journey identifying, and I'll read yours in just a second, cause effect, compare contrast relationships, and hopefully refreshing what goes on with intro phrases and coordinating conjunctions. When it comes to coordinating conjunctions, the rule of thumb is when you have a sentence, a coordinating conjunction, and a sentence, where does your comma go? Before the coordinating conjunction. If you have sentence, coordinating conjunction, not a sentence, what's going on with your comma? You don't need one. How do you decide what coordinating conjunction to use? Or how do you, fanboys, or how do you decide if an author has used a fanboys correctly?
No.
I'm saying, let's say I have these two things are written out the same. Sentence here, sentence here. One author put the word and for their coordinating conjunction. One author put the word so for their coordinating conjunction.
The relationship of the two sentences.
So I'd figure out who's right based on the relationship of those two sentences. Does that make sense? Intro phrases are triggered by words like while, because, even though. If you use the word because, what's going to be the relationship that exists in your sentence? Cause effect. If I use the word while, what's going to be the relationship that exists in your sentence? Okay, let's say that I have somebody who has two sentences and they'd like to include an intro phrase in their second sentence, and they're deciding whether or not to use a word like while or a word like because. How are they going to figure out what's the most appropriate word to use?
Whether they're opposing something or the other one.
Cause affecting something.
Yeah.
Right? Lists. We're familiar with lists, right?
Yep.
Item 1, 2, 3, or 3 steps in a process. No parts of those lists can stand alone as complete sentences unless they got some semicolons in there. If you just know that, and 40 questions are available for you on the English portion of the ACT. And so we're going to kind of put that into practice. Here are 3 ACT questions. Okay, so question 1 deals with what's going on right here in this bracketed portion. Number 18 deals with what's going on right here where the 18 appears. 20 deals with where the 20 appears. These are all about punctuation. So what's punctuated correctly? What word or phrase needs to be included in order to get the question type right? So I want you to make your way through questions 1, 2, 3. Circle A, B, C, D. Raise your hand when you're done. I'll come by and let you know, hopefully, how well you did. Yes, good. Okay. It's a good sign.
Big star.
100. She's cheating. She's cheating. She's cheating. She's cheating.
What this one?
Okay, now I feel pressured. So,
That's what I was gonna go with, but then.
no wait, that's not the one.
No, that's not.
Oh, wait, is it not changed?
Yes,
I hate those.
100%.
Steve, you gotta get help. You know when we do those like the pluses, but then he keeps adding lines, he needs help?
No, trust yourself.
Oh, you don't need to make me feel bad.
What?
You don't need to make me feel bad.
All right, let's take a gander at these.
You're saying it's a key.
Oh dear.
With the AirPods?
Okay. So we're looking down here. Let's check out number 18 for a moment. There should be two answers that you just get rid of right away, J and F. J should be out of the door right away because what word would be a misuse of a word? But. Why is but not a good word to use here?
Because then she'd say something not about me.
Right. There's no contrast between these two sentences. So we're locked into therefore or so, right? Because these two sentences have what type of relationship with one another? Cause and effect. So because I know that these two sentences are cause affecting, I know that we should have a therefore or so. Now I need to decide which one, G or H, is appropriate. I do that based on my knowledge of punctuation. Is this a whole sentence? I'm interested in a career in nursing.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a sentence. I decided to try to secure a spot as a volunteer in a local hospital. Is that a sentence?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. You can connect two sentences with what type of thing? A coordinating conjunction. Is therefore a coordinating conjunction? No. So we get rid of it. We have the word so. Is that a coordinating conjunction?
Heck yeah.
I got two full sentences, so I put a comma before that coordinating conjunction. Is that cool too?
Yeah.
Boom. Hey, and so you should be able to, you're able to identify these types of relationships, and you're able to know commas and where commas are placed. Everything that's like this is at your fingertips. Down here, kind of a trick question in the sense of what type of comma is being used. A list, right? So what are the items in my list? Okay, so I had a nice pair of slacks, a blouse, and some comfortable shoes. Would it make sense for me to put a comma after pair?
No,
Because that's not an item in the list. Pair of slacks is an item of the list. So the right answer there is no change, right? So this is how you can kind of, and we'll continue to kind of play around with this going forward. But we hit commas hard 2 months, right? If you know commas and you're able to identify and hang out with these relationships, you're in a good shape. This class is taking a little longer than I had anticipated. Let's quickly talk about induction and deduction. Oh, Jeff?
Are we going to talk about dashes? There's
Yeah.
a couple of those.
We're going to talk about dashes once we become refreshed with coordinating conjunction, intro phrase, noun appositive, list, semicolon, and colon. So refresh that bad boy, and then we talk about dashes. Dashes, though, to spoiler alert, they function as like noun appositives on steroids.
Okay.
So if you wanted to include a list in the middle of your sentence of something, you could offset that with dashes. It just helps offset what's in the middle from the rest of the sentence. Okay. All right. Somebody help me understand the difference between induction and deduction. Jess.
Deduction is like going from a main or a large idea to like a small premises.
All right. And induction is what?
The opposite of going from small premises to a big idea.
All right. Now, this is how induction and deduction is most commonly explained to students, or it is commonly explained in your book. However, when it's explained just like this, it leaves some opportunities for misconceptions. It's not necessarily that deduction means you go from a bunch of big points down to a small point. It's not necessarily that in induction you're going from, I got example, 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 so therefore big idea. More importantly, you want to think of induction as using specific examples to prove a point. So even though you might write a paper that starts off with a thesis statement, and then you follow that up with a bunch of examples that prove that thesis statement, that's still induction. Does that make sense? When I was first taught this, you think of your thesis statement as your big idea, right? And the stuff that you use to prove that thesis statement, smaller ideas. So you would think that that would be deduction because we have big thing first and small thing second. However, that's not the case. When you're thinking about deduction, you're starting off with like big ideas, man, and you're engaging in a conversation about things, man. And then through that conversation, you end up making a point. So you're bringing up kind of like these different ideas and connecting some dots, and then you're ending with something that's logical and conclusive. Whereas induction, you're using specific examples to prove a big idea. Does that make sense? It's okay to shake your head no a little bit. Okay? So in deduction, as it's described in the book, you have kind of like major and minor premises. So if I have my major premise is that wrestlers are malnourished, and my minor, so that's my big. I start off talking about like, hey, wrestlers are malnourished, man, and then I come up with Tyler Hansberger is a wrestler. Using the process of deduction, what small specific point can I make? That Hansberger is malnourished. So I'm engaging in this conversation about Hansberger, or wrestlers are malnourished because of this, that, and the other thing. And then I move on to talking about how Hansberger is a wrestler and what's going on in his life. And then using deduction, I would end with the specific point that Hansberger is malnourished. Okay. As opposed to induction, I would say Hansberger is malnourished. That's my big idea. What specific things would I use to prove that Hansberger is malnourished? You could talk about how he only eats 2,000 calories a day, even though he spends 3,000 calories a day. I could bring up the specific point that for lunch he only eats salads, and he spends his day spitting in a cup to lose weight. So those are specific reasons that prove this big point, as opposed to drawing these conclusions based on a conversation. Does that help clarify it, Hansberger? Okay, so now let's look at our essay here. I want you to take a gander at paragraphs 4, 5, 6, and 7. Or sorry, 4, 5, and 6. So I want you to read paragraphs 4, 5, and 6 quickly. And I want you to tell me in paragraphs 4, 5, and 6, is the author bringing up specific examples to prove a point? Or in paragraphs 4, 5, and 6, is the author engaging in a conversation about ideas, man, to end up making a conclusion? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right, have at it.
So are you saying like the 3 paragraphs individually or as all?
Treat them as a unit.
Okay.
Yep, so that 3-paragraph unit. You better, Ty. terrifying. Does anybody need more time to read those 3 paragraphs? All right. So, don't be afraid to be wrong here. You just got to talk things out. Do you see more of something that's induction, using specific reasons to support a point? Or do you see something that's more deduction, engaging in a larger conversation and then ending with a point? Induction. So Jet's hypothesizing induction. For induction to be true, there needs to be a main point that is supported by specific examples. So if Jet's assertion is correct, class, what is the main point that these 3 paragraphs spend proving? Not yet. You were the brave soul who threw something out there. Yes, we're gonna let somebody else try to take you to the top.
Universities have rushed to sacrifice complexity for diversity.
Universities have, so we have sacrificed complexity for diversity.
They'd rather have students read a bunch of different kinds of texts than one type of like difficult text. So, it just talks about how like they read a lot of different kinds of books.
Hey,
That's one of
so
the
what are
reasons.
examples that prove that we have sacrificed complexity for diversity?
He talked about how his own 2 sons have.
It's a
read-
she.
Oh, sorry. Okay, she talks about how her own 2 sons have read Shakespeare, Hawthorne, Melville, but they've also read Alice Walker, Maya, I don't know.
Angelou.
Yeah, John Steinbeck, Ray Brett, like a bunch of different
Okay,
authors.
so those are examples that prove which part of my main point?
That there's diversity.
That there's diversity, and why is that diversity a bad thing? What kind of words does this author use to describe these authors?
Lemon-like.
Dysfunctional, weeping, right? So what is she suggesting about these works? That they are lacking in some way, that they are melodramatic. Okay. Now the 6th paragraph, the stuff that's there is illustrating what? We've proven that we're reading a bunch of diverse stuff here. What's left in my main idea? There's no complexity, right? And so how does she show that there's no complexity in the 6th paragraph? She brings up a bunch of examples of
Science fiction.
things that students
Don't want to talk about.
neither has heard or a teacher suggest that he read Kafka, though one might suppose that teenagers might enjoy the transformative science fiction aspects of the Metamorphosis, a story about a young man so alienated from his dysfunctional family that he turns, embarrassingly from them, into a giant beetle. Is this author suggesting that kids should be reading Kafka or shouldn't be reading Kafka? Should, right? So if this author wants complexity, reading Kafka would be an example of what? Complexity. They continue. No instructor has ever asked my sons to read Alice Munro, who writes so lucidly and beautifully about the hypersensitivity that makes adolescence a hell. So Alice Munro, is she an example of somebody who is complex or diverse? Complex. Okay, so we have inductive reasoning going on here in this 3-paragraph segment. Paragraph 3 presents the main idea. Students are reading diverse stuff at the expense of complex stuff, and that's bad. Paragraph 5 brings up diverse stuff, specific examples of diverse stuff, and it alludes to why that's not good. Paragraph 6 brings up specific examples of complex stuff and points out why that would be better than the diverse stuff. Does that 3-paragraph unit make sense to you? Okay. Now, contrast that with the first 3 paragraphs you read at the beginning of class. In those first 3 paragraphs, was the author bringing up specifics to prove a main point, or were they engaged in some sort of larger discussion in an effort to lead up to a point? What'd you say? Larger discussion, right? Deduction. Okay, so what is the deductive reasoning taking place in the first 3 paragraphs? If you're going to figure that out, you still need to come up with what is the main point, what is the small specific point that the author is trying to make. So in paragraph 3, what main point does the author finally land on that captures what happens in paragraph 1 and paragraph 2?
As a nation, we're not reading as much.
So close.
As a nation, we're reading enough, but we're not learning about it or reading the right stuff.
There we go. So as a nation, we're reading a bunch. Book sales are through the roof, but we are not avid readers. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah,
And they build up to that by engaging in this discussion about how she's noticed that her high school is not serving students well. And then in paragraph number 2, she wonders, well, if high school is not serving students well, those students grow up to become teachers and they cling to those bad books that they read as students. And so then we continue to read these bad books. And so what's the problem with that? Like what you guys just illustrated. Then, therefore, as a nation, there's this problem that's coming up. Does that make sense? So we have a 3-paragraph unit where we kind of have deduction happening. We have a 3-paragraph unit where we have induction happening. You put those things together, and can you see how these 6 paragraphs all work together to make a larger point? So the point being, hey, high school reading sucks. People who read in high school grow up to become teachers. So those sucky books continue to stay in high school. And because your love of reading is formed by what you do or do not do in high school, that causes you to have problems as adults. And colleges are missing an opportunity to teach complexity instead of diversity. And then it gives you specific examples of that. This is not easy stuff to begin to understand how paragraphs work together to form a larger point. You're used to writing. Here's my specific idea. Here's my supporting details. However, essays don't often function like that. They engage in longer discursive discussions. And so we're going to start continuing to poke apart at that. For tomorrow, what I want you to do, you have page 178 through page 183. Okay, so you have about 10, 9, 8, 7. Paragraph 7 to paragraph 29. What I want you to do is just come back to class tomorrow with chunks of paragraphs identified that you think demonstrate inductive or deductive reasoning. So just like we said, hey, paragraphs 1, 2, 3, they work together for deductive. Paragraphs 4, 5, 6, they work together for inductive. So tomorrow, Logan's going to say, yeah, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, that's all inductive. And here's why I think that. 11, 12, 13, 14, that's deductive. And here's why I think that. So just try to chunk paragraphs together and frame them as either inductive or deductive. Does that make sense, class? Okay, so just 3 pages to work with. Come ready to talk about it.
So now I'm confused again.
Yep.
Between induction and deduction.
Tell me why, Jack.
So induction